I haven't done it yet. I may do it. If this doesn't work out, probably I will do it. I would almost say definitely.
Welcome to my New Year's resolution, which is starting this series. What's up? My name is Jana Pell. I've basically been a musician for my whole life, been a songwriter for most of it, been a producer for longer than I've given myself credit for, and a mixer over the past couple of years, aka since COVID. I've really kind of had no choice but to get a better understanding of the more technical aspects of music creation, and it's made me realize that it doesn't have to be framed that way. If you're like me, you've watched a lot of these mixing tutorials and you found yourself zoning out within the first few minutes because they are referencing a lot of compressors you've never heard of, or analog gear you don't have experience with, or just using a lot of jargon that almost feels like it's intentionally meant to make you feel inferior. And I did not plan on making mixing tutorials this early in my mixing career, but I've had lots of conversations with friends and they're like, wow, that actually makes sense to me now. I also recently released my first fully self-produced, mostly self-mixed album, Echolocation, and I've been getting a lot of compliments on the mixing in particular, which was the part that I was most self-conscious of. So all that said, here I am, and that brings me to how I came up with the title for this series, Stop Mixing Sense. So first I was brainstorming some names, and the first one that came to me was Make Mixing Make Sense, because I liked the parallelism and repetition of make and make, but because I also majored in advertising in a past life, I knew that that was too clunky and too long. So I started thinking of alternatives, and immediately my mind went to my favorite concert film, The Talking Heads' Stop Making Sense. And how could it not? I've had a very big obsession with David Byrne for quite a long time now. But back to mixing and the title of this series, Stop Mixing Sense, and why I think it is the perfect title. Number one, I think that as artists, sometimes we think that there's a stricter dichotomy between the creative and the technical than there actually is in reality, and we convince ourselves that we can't be both. But that is simply not true anymore. Probably the only reason it ever was true was because you didn't used to be able to record an entire album in your house. Number two, while yes, people do tend to be either more right-brained or more left-brained, what if mixing was explained not from an engineering perspective, not from a technical perspective, but from an almost biological one that would make sense to people who consider themselves artists first, or maybe people who didn't even play music at all? Because let's face it, we're all here on this earth perceiving the world through our senses via the human experience. So let's get into it. Stop Mixing Sense, lesson one. Okay, so if we have these two shapes, and I tell you that one is called KIKI and one is called BOUBA, which one is KIKI and which one is BOUBA, and why? The KIKI-BOUBA effect is actually a study done by linguists using participants from all over the world, and overwhelmingly, this object was KIKI and this object was BOUBA, regardless of the participant's native language. Why? What is this seemingly universal truth about these two arbitrary objects? You might be able to tell that oo is a darker, rounder vowel than E, which is brighter and a little bit more piercing in nature, but also consider the shape your mouth is actually making when you're saying these sounds. Your mouth itself looks either more rounded or more straight, which makes the names of these objects seem almost obvious. So I also minored in linguistics in a past life, and I always thought this was a fascinating but otherwise useless piece of information. But what if we replaced KIKI and BOUBA with a kick drum and a triangle, a violin and a cello, a bass and a guitar? Which one is KIKI and which one is BOUBA in these pairings? And what about the frequency spectrum itself? If we split it into two at, let's say, 1K, which side is KIKI and which side is BOUBA? If we split it into two at, let's say, 1K, which side is KIKI and which side is BOUBA? And if you can approach your mix and ask yourself, is this too KIKI or is this too BOUBA? Not just about the mix, but about the individual instruments that make up the mix, then you'll be in pretty good shape.